Hi, I am more than excited today that we're going to be talking to my really, really good friend, Al Watson. He is one who's very familiar with depression and anxiety. And in this season of COVID 19, a lot of that has been exacerbated just because of the conditions we find ourselves living in. So I'm very excited that he will be joining us today for a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Yeah, there you go. There you go. How are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just finishing up on a call. So, hey there.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Wonderful. So, look, we are 2 to 3 months into this unprecedented shakeup of the world. I want to know first, how are you doing?
I'm good. Just making it like everyone else. Literally just got off a phone call. Getting off a phone call with the Small Business Administration, answering some phone calls for them, trying to help relieve some of the tension for some other people. So that's what I was just doing.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad you are contributing, as you always do, to the good of the world. It's one of the things I appreciate about you. I wanted to talk today about this idea of suicide, depression, anxiety, and how that's showing up in the world given this COVID 19 space that we're in and this condition that we're living with. As I shared with some people, well, not some people, through my blog and even personally shared with you, on March the 24th, I lost a really good friend to suicide. And then earlier this week, I was reading that in LA in particular, they reported on the news that suicide and help calls had gone up by 8,000%, not 800%, 8,000% since February. So one organization, let me get it right, DD Hirsch had reported that they had only had 22 cases in February. 30 days later, 22 calls into their center in February. 30 days later, that number was over 1,000. And my question for
Wow.
you, what is it do you think, um, does that number surprise you? Does it surprise you at all that the numbers have gone up? And what is it that you think people are calling for? What do people want who's calling?
This might surprise you, but I'm surprised that there's only been 22 calls. Not the expansion of calls. I'm surprised at the 22 calls.
So in
I
February,
think,
you're surprised at the number.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's I'm surprised at those amount of calls. I think what has happened is the reality of. I think a couple things have happened. Obviously, being we're all being impacted by what's happening. I think the heaviness of it and people uh, having to sit with themselves. That's I think that's really becoming something for a lot of people. I think on the outside of this, when people are able to make it through, they'll get a strength that they didn't know that they had.
Mm.
Uh, but I'm also seeing also I think that what's happening is that people are just lost. They're just lost in not being able to deflect in any way, shape, or form like they used to by being busy. They can't be busy. So now if there's something going on with Al has to deal with Al, and there's nowhere to go.
Hmm.
So that's what I think is really, really happening. But I'm really surprised by the low number of calls. The impact is just a result of the sheer fact that people cannot run and they had to deal with it. But I also think there's a little bit of groupthink in it where people are realizing that everybody's saying, hey, I'm in here and I'm losing it. So now I feel safe to make that phone call.
Got you. I should back up a little bit because one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you in particular is because you did the brave thing about a year ago, maybe a little longer, of sharing with your Facebook followers that you have suffered with depression and anxiety. And as a Black
Mhm.
person, that's not something we do. But as a man, that's not something you all do, just publicly making yourself vulnerable like that. I wanted you to speak to what inspired you to finally kind of come out and share that with people. What was your thought process around wanting to do it and doing it when you did?
It I think I got to a place where, honestly, truthfully, going through the process, I actually uh, realized that it probably was the best thing that happened to me,
Mm.
when knowing that, uh, and I'm a spiritual person, so therefore God sat me down and said, if you don't want to deal with it this way, I gave you opportunity, I gave you opportunity. So this is what's going to happen to now. I'm going to sit you down and make you have to deal with it.
Mm.
So me having to sit down and having to deal with it became a place of solace, to be perfectly honest, because the more you run, the harder it is. But when you sit down and deal with it, then you can realize this is might not be as bad as I thought it is.
Yeah.
And it's just having the tools to be able to navigate what's going to happen. So I was, thankfully, I went through the process of, and I was really didn't think this would be good. I actually went through group therapy. I didn't think that would work, but it did. And the reason why it was because I realized it wasn't just me. And I think that's probably what contributed to the courage to be vulnerable, that it wasn't just me.
Amen.
And being a Black male, I realized, and I guess because just how I am, I don't have a problem with sharing, because I know it's not just me. If that's the case, we would only have one pill. We would only have one type of therapy. So I know there's other people, and they maybe just be looking for some level of inspiration. I just felt like, hey, the only way this is going to help me is for me to get this off of me. Me getting it off of me and sharing with the world, somebody else might be impacted. And if I become someone to reach out to, so be it. Great. If not, I got it off of me. If for me, it was really, I just needed to get off of me, and I wasn't going to hide.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a great segue into my next question. For those persons who are hiding in plain sight, if you will, we all are sheltered in place together. As I keep saying, people are no longer like two ships passing in the night. They have to sit home and deal with each other. So what do you think we miss as family members and people who are friends to people who suffer with anxiety and depression? What do you think we miss? And can you also speak to what family members can do right now to help somebody who may be in the house with them struggling with anxiety and depression?
Uh, One, I'll say this, and this might be a little conflicting. I don't think we miss anything.
Oh, really?
I think we might not know. We might not know what those symptoms are of anxiety, because everybody's is not the same. So
Okay.
obviously, everyone's not a clinician, everyone's not a social worker, so they don't know what those things are. But if
Yeah.
you make yourself aware of what those things are, then it becomes, once you do know, it becomes having the courage to say something.
Mm.
I have a sister who is a therapist who, uh, has zero concerns confronting, because you have to have the courage to confront someone to save someone.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
takes a lot. It takes a lot, because
That's an
uh,
exceptional point. I like that point.
yeah, it takes a lot to confront someone to save someone, because if people see some things happen and we don't understand, or we don't feel comfortable, because we don't want that person to be hurt, or we don't want to make an assumption and be wrong. But I would rather, for myself, I would rather be wrong and say something, and have to apologize, and then not to say nothing, and then now we sitting around and eating chicken and collard greens.
Yeah, yeah. And eating a chicken and collard greens, meaning because we're sitting at a repast and that person has passed away.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
to,
and
to quote
again,
to quote to quote Biggie, "Slow singing and flower bringing."
yeah. And so the second part of my question is, what could someone who's sitting at home with somebody who's dealing with depression and anxiety do? Again, all of us aren't clinicians, right?
Right.
For the person who feels a little helpless and resourceless,
Okay.
what could they do in terms of helping the person who actually kind of comes to them and say, I'm feeling really anxious. They've been locked in their room several days with all the shades down. So there's some sense of a depressive state setting in. What's your suggestion to
hmm
anybody living with somebody like that?
one that could realize your limitations, but also whatever you feel comfortable with. Please do not try to be Nurse Betty and step outside of your parameters where you feel comfortable to do something that you're not comfortable with. Because when you start to ask questions and dig in things, people might share some things with you that you might not be ready for.
How about that? Yeah.
So therefore, you had to be really, really, you had to be comfortable within yourself. And I'm sure as you know, as someone who does the work that you do, you hear some things, and if you weren't comfortable with yourself, you would not be able to shed that at the end of that conversation.
Exactly.
So you have to be grounded within yourself to be able to hear what it is you want to hear, because someone might share some things about their past or their history that you didn't know about them, and realize, can I handle what was said?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you can, then I think it's incumbent upon that person just to be there, to check in with that person consistently, but then also do the real big work, is really trying to find resources and ways that that person can be helped. Because if that's not in your wheelhouse, please let someone else who that's what they do, let them do what they do, and you just connect them with it, and just really, connecting with them, checking with them, be reassuring. And whenever you don't feel comfortable, that's when you need to really, really reach out.
Yeah, and the reaching out part is so profoundly important. And as astonishing as the 8,000% increase was for the calls, as I made mention to earlier, I was happy to hear it, because it also said that people are coming to the realization that they can't handle something on their own. And that's what the resourcefulness really is about. You really have to get to that place where, as smart as you think you are, as much money as you may have, as wonderful as your career may be, needing help is not a bad thing. And I think that sometimes people suffer in silence too long, just because of the stigma associated with asking for help.
I agree 100%. And I think this goes back to your previous question about being a Black male and acknowledging, is men are instilled with this thing, of pride in and of itself. I think that's just in our DNA in and of itself. But then specifically being a Black male, especially being from an urban area specifically, and even just being from the urban area is enough. Being from, as we both know, we both from Baltimore,
Right.
which is a whole nother horse of another color.
Right. Sure.
There is no place for sensitivity or vulnerability in Baltimore. You have to be on guard at all times. As soon as you step out of your house, and then for some people, unfortunately, you can't even be vulnerable in your own house.
Right.
But when you step out of the door, you have to be. I think it's just so much of a challenge, as a male in that realm, to be able to just say, hey, I need this help, to be able to drop the mask and just say, I need it. I can't, it's nothing else that I can do. But it takes an awful, awful lot, because there's a lot of shame that goes with it. And there's a lot of shame that goes with it. You don't want to be seen as weak. That's where I really think you have to have a counterpart, depending on your relationship status or whoever's around you, who's really, really assuring. Because and this is where the biggest challenge comes from men, and you and I had this conversation, if I go and show you my level of vulnerability, and then somewhere down the line you use that against me, one, I'm going to probably prayerfully, just verbally, I'm going to attack you, because I showed you my vulnerability. I took that chance to do it. You use it against me. So therefore, I'm automatically going to withdraw. I'm going to withdraw. And the very next person who I might engage at that particular level, I'm not going to share it all.
Exactly. And thank you. I can't even thank you enough for bringing that point out, because it is about being able to support somebody and allow them to know that they can trust you with their vulnerability and them being in a vulnerable space. And as you said earlier, if you can't handle it, don't go there, right? So don't ask questions you aren't ready for the answers to, and don't try to help somebody get somewhere where you don't think you can help them to get. So that point was really, really powerful. And how many Black men in particular are still stuck and struggling because they didn't know who they could be vulnerable with. I know even with my friend in Baltimore that recently took his life, I kept thinking to myself since his passing, and I share this with you, you know, how could I perhaps have been a better friend, even from a distance? Was there something about our friendship that didn't make him feel safe enough? And not just his friendship with me, but with anybody, because every friend that he had that I'm connected to, nobody knew. None of us knew. So just this idea of being able to let your guard down and be vulnerable enough to say, listen, I'm hurting. These demons inside of my head are really, really tormenting me. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So I thank you for lifting that. I want to know, what are some of the strategies, Al, that you're using and have used to help you to mitigate and manage anxiety and depression when it shows up in your life? Because what I love about you is you are consistently determined to get ahead of the anxiety and the depression. You are not in any way complicit with allowing it to get the best of you. So what are some of the strategies that work with you?
I think everybody has to have their thing or things. I know for me, the first thing I wake up in the morning, like I said, I'm a spiritual person. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read my Bible to get my day started. And then look for some positive things that might be in my life. I've done certain things outside of spirituality. I've done Tai Chi, I've done yoga, meditation, open myself to all these other different types of things that are going to be calming for my spirit. But honestly, truthfully, I think the biggest thing is not to run from it. And that's the biggest thing I can honestly say, is not to run from it. And then once you decide that, hey, I'm not going to run from it, is to try to figure it out. And because we've had some very in-depth and intense conversations. Just try to understand what it is. I think for me, if I can understand what it is, then that's a healing place. That, okay, now I know what it is, so now I can figure out what to do. But if you don't know what it is, then that's where, for me, I can only say for me, it was so confounding when I just didn't understand what was going on. Yeah. And that's the part that really sends you, when you really understand that, hey, it is a thing, and it's not, you aren't the only person. Then it's like, whew, for me, it was like, oh, okay, great. So, like I said, first thing in the morning, I'm going to be reading my Bible. I share with other people, like we share all the time. And then, finding some other positive things in my life to do, and just really, really it's just really consistent work to try to be a better person for myself. So somewhere down the line, when I, my friends and families and anyone else, because I know how I have, and it wasn't purposeful, it's just that pain of the hurt specifically, and to tie into what it is you talked about as far as the suicide is concerned. As I shared with you, my father committed suicide at 6. So I'm the person left holding the bag, trying to ask the questions. Yeah. And that's a rough place to be as well, because not only did that person commit suicide and take their own life, but my father, my biological father, I have so many questions that I could get unanswered. And just until recently, as I shared with you, I just let it go, because the only person I can get the answers from, the person that's not living. Right. And so I just had to let it go. Right. I just had to let it go. It, a hurtful place, but it was a freeing place.
Yeah. Yeah. My last question to you, because I know you're on limited time, is, again, we're all kind of stuck and sheltered in place. You said so eloquently earlier that people are having to sit with themselves for the very first time in a long time. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. What advice would you give to the person who right now is depressed, filled, overwhelmed with anxiety, have been for some time, whether it's related to COVID-19 or not, and is contemplating suicide, what would you say to that person who tunes in, who happens to click YouTube and see this? What would be your message to them today?
I would say go ahead and have your cry. Go ahead and have your moment, because I do not believe in telling people, oh, you shouldn't feel this way or you shouldn't feel that way. No, go right on ahead. Have your feelings, have your moment, but do realize that you can come through it, because I've been there. I thought I would never understand what it was like to wake up and for 3 days not literally wanting to get out of bed. I didn't even brush my teeth for 3 days. All I did was get up, eat, and go back to bed. So I've been there. And that's the biggest thing. Understand that someone else has been in your shoes. And to go back to something that you said that was very important, I thought was powerful when you talk about as far as suicide is concerned. And this is going to sound very bad, but if somebody wants to commit suicide, it's going to happen. And they're not going to give anybody any indications of that was going to happen. If someone is, and I don't want to minimize this, but if someone is, and I don't want to say attention seeking, but if they say that they're going to do some of these things or they're hinting these things, they're trying to give people an opportunity to stop them from doing it. But if that's what you choose to do, and that's why you said none of the biggest key that I heard is like nobody knew, because he knew in his mind what it is that he was going to do. So therefore, he had made resolve to the point that this is what's going to happen. It sounds very, very bad, but I just have to be perfectly honest that if that's what someone's made up in mind, that's what they're going to do. Unless they reach out for help, that's what they're going to do. But someone who's sitting there, right now, please know and realize that you can make it through, because I've been there, literally been there, sobbing, crying, trying to figure out what's going on in my life, trying to figure out, literally, I asked myself one night, probably about 4 o'clock in the morning, am I losing my mind? I had to ask myself, am I losing my mind? And realize that, it was just a combination of things. I needed some rest. I needed to be upfront. I needed to confront myself. I needed to just be honest. I needed to be vulnerable. And if I did, when I started to do some of those things and just parse the things out that I can do, the low-lying fruit, with just kind of, hey, let's just get up and let's just wash our face today. Hey, let's just make sure we eat today. Start some of those smaller things and make some of those smaller strides. You see some of those victories and then share. Like I said, I'm thankful that I have a sister who is a therapist that I can reach out to. So, but everybody doesn't have that.
Right.
But at least what I will say is you cannot do it on your own.
Yeah. Thank you, Al. Thank you so much. You and I've been talking about the opportunity to have this conversation, and I'm just so grateful that you made time. I love you. You are a brother, and I thank you for your example in the world. I thank you for persevering and just for your honesty. I really, really appreciate your honesty, because we need to hear it, and we don't get the opportunity to have these kind of intimate conversations, in particular with Black men. So I really want to thank you for showing up for your own life every day, but also for showing up for the many people who will need to hear what you had to say today. Thanks, Al.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for doing what it is that you do, Mischa. And we'll talk offline a little bit further. And
Okay.
thank you for being my new best friend.
All right. Take good care. Bye-bye.
All right.
That was Al Watson. And how brave of him to share with us his story, his experience with anxiety and depression. I am so grateful again for his honesty and for his sharing. I pray that it is helpful to someone. In fact, I know it will be helpful to someone. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to talking with you all again next week. Bye-bye.